What is going on, guys? Welcome back. I know it's been a while. I've had some personal stuff going, but the chamber's back, so thank you for stepping in. We're getting right back into it, looking at a profile for the next set, talking about green, specifically mono green Videl. Videl's a leader that came out a couple of sets ago with the introduction of Spirit Boosts, and people thought she'd have a lot of legs, but that never ended up materializing. She had a couple of fringe tops here and there as a hand control deck. With green in the state that it's in, we're kind of looking for like a deck you can actually play with, and I think Videl is the leader of choice to bring that back. So we're going to go through the deck, how to play with it, some tech and line options like usual, and what you can do if you happen to see Videl on the other end of the table. Before we get going, we have to shout out our custom leader like always. We have one from DavidsonTCG. He does excellent custom leaders. Some of them now come with gold foiling. This one does not, but it's still an incredibly gorgeous leader. And in my opinion, it's a superior artwork. The fact that the leader awakens to become the town's heroine, but she's not Salmon 2, is kind of a flavor fail. So for the rest of the video, we're going to use the custom leader. So let's get into it. Videl is a 5k, 10k leader. And like all 5k, 10k leaders, she has a way to get around that gimmick. She has 2 autos. The first, technically she has 3 autos. The first is whenever she attacks, she draws a card. Pretty standard. The 2 autos that matter. She has one that when you combo with a Skillless, you draw a card. It doesn't have to be a green Skillless. Kind of nifty. And then she has a second auto that requires a Spirit Boost to activate. On your opponent's turn, if you combo a Skillless from your hand, you can Spirit Boost 1 and play the Skillless that you comboed. This is useful not only because the Skillless comes in active mode, so you can immediately turn it into more combo power, but it's also important for a lot of our battle tricks and enablers. You also get to take a life whenever you combo with a Skillless, so you have unusually high control over your life total. This is actually kind of a defensive deck where you want to take advantage of your smaller body. So generally you're not going to take a lot of life, but some matchups, the fact you have that option to take a life both in your turns and your opponent's turn is pretty useful. When you awaken at 4 or less, you draw 1 and tap 1. Her awaken side is basically just power boosted across the board. Her auto when you combo a Skillless now also gives the Skillless a 4k boost. So your first Skillless is free and becomes a 19k, or puts your leader to 19, which gets you out of a lot of attacks without actually expending resources. Your Spirit Boost can now be done on either player's turn, so you can put cards into play on your own turn, not just your opponent's. And your Skilllesses now come out with a 5k power boost. Since our Skilllesses are 10ks, the 5k makes them a 15, so they're actually a lethal threat. And then finally, her auto when she attacks and draws a card. The auto also allows you to rest a unison you have in active mode, and if you rest an active unison, you can add the unison's power to her own. So sometimes if you just need a cheeky burst of power, you can get your leader to surprisingly beefy swings. Very common, you'll swing it at either 25 or 39, but we'll get into that as the deck goes on. So that's the leader. I'm just going to leave her out there to talk about, show off. We'll put her up here. Starting with the basic stuff, our Skilllesses. We play 7 1-drops and 2 2-drops. The 1-drops are just our enablers. The 2-drops will trigger our leader's combo requirement, so they're still effective for basically being like free combo power. But they're in here for another card, which we're about to talk to. Our bread and butter, our big staple for the deck, we play a full playset of great Salmon 2 Budding Hero. So the way Budding Hero works is that you can bounce a Skillless and play her for 1, and when you do that, she plays a 2-cost Skillless from your deck or drop, 2 or less. So you can grab a 1-drop if you have to. So what you'll often do is combo a Skillless. Combo a 1-drop Skillless, Spirit Boost it into play because it has to be a 1-drop. Comes out at 15, you can attack with it, and then use a Salmon 2 and bounce it to your hand, and Salmon 2 will then find you a 2-cost Skillless. So this is a 15k beater and a 20k beater, and it's all advantage because you don't lose a card for comboing the skills because it replaces itself. You bounce the skills back to hand so you can combo it again later, and then she gets you a 2k. This is your big advantage engine, and you're pretty much trying to resolve at least this card every single turn. Because we are a green deck, and because of that previous interaction, getting into more of the things that play off or are enabled by our skills cards, we actually play 3 copies of Fuse Zamasu. It's really easy to get to 5. Let's put them over there, sorry. It's really easy to get to 5 in this deck because not only do we have access to Charismatic Villain, and we have access to him throughout the entire game, but the combination we just talked about with Budding Hero into Son Gohan Skillless gives you exactly 5 energy on board. So after you use both of them, you can pay 1 and break it into a Zamasu, which is one of the best green cards has. He's just hard to play. And then next turn you can recycle the skills you used and play a second one, and you can do this. You can make a Zamasu like every turn. The only thing that holds him back is that you have to wait till turn 3 to play him. If you could play him at any time, he might be a 4F in this deck. Another piece of tech that we run, we play 2 copies of Videl with all her strength. This card is basically a hand trap. When your opponent declares an attack, if you have a skillless out, which isn't too hard for us to do, you pay green and put her into play, and then your opponent either gives you a free Charismatic Villain trigger, you get to KO something that costs 7 or less, or if they don't want to do that, they discard 2 cards. It is the opponent's choice for which you get, so it's important to make sure that when you play this card that they have a target. The only thing that kind of sucks about her is that you have to have a skillless in play to trigger her, otherwise we play more copies. Sometimes she's kind of dead, because if their board is empty, she doesn't do a whole lot, but she's great when she's live. So we play a couple copies just to be able to threaten her when she's available. Let's talk unisons. Our best opener for the deck is our 4 copies of Great Saiyaman 2, the Mysterious Hero. So this is a 9k unison, sorry, 6k unison, but when it gets attacked, it has an auto to let you basically like free combo a skillless. So it defends like an 11k, which is kind of nice. And once your leader is awakened, it'll defend like it's a 15k, but that doesn't come up too often. The main reason he's here is A, he has a +1 on our turn to just search us a skillless from our deck. So it's a +1 that draws us a card that we can then combo to get more cards. So it's really good deck thinning. And then he has an auto that triggers whenever we Spirit Boost to KO something 2 or less. So early on, when you're trying to like play cards to like establish a skillless, you can get out of like tiny swings and then sometimes eat like random 1-drops your opponents have played. So he's a great like opener, but he has a tendency to die because he's only a 6k body. He only protects himself once and he only gains 1 markers, but he's not our primary unison. He's just here for like turns 1 and 2. Once Saiyaman has done his job, our workhorse unison for the deck, we play 3 copies of Dark Broly, Overwhelming Evil. This card's kind of nutty in Videl because not only does Videl get to large hand sizes, which means we can use his +2 kind of willy-nilly because it's not we're not at risk of like burning our own hand down. But once Videl's running, you kind of want to Spirit Boost on your turn and your opponent's turn to keep like creating advantage off of your skilllesses. And to do that, you burn through markers on a unison. But D-Bro's a 20k base body, and realistically the turn you play him, he comes down with 5 markers because you're going to +2 him immediately. So he has a huge marker pool to work with, and his base 20k body means that he's not going anywhere. Like, he's very hard for a lot of decks to remove. So much so that they often just ignore him and focus on you instead. This means that you can access Charismatic Villain Dormant for the entire game. It gives you good hand and board control. He's just excellent in this deck in particular. And then, as we mentioned, almost forgot, when your leader attacks, sometimes you just need a single beefy swing, so you can rest D-Bro, and you're at a base 30k swing with your leader, just baseline, which sometimes is exactly what you're looking for to clear like a larger beat stick. And then you can put like a skillless and some other combo power and stuff that we'll talk about. You can get to some like massive swings with your leader if you need to. Because we're playing a unison on 1 and on 3, we pretty much always have a unison live, so we play a full playset of Charismatic Villain. Villain is a green staple. He's free as long as we have a unison with 2 or more markers. And when he comes down, he KOs anything that costs 7 or less. In conjunction with Dark Broly and Videl with all her strength, we actually have a lot of interactive board control on our opponent's turn, and on our turn for that matter, to help keep our opponent's board kind of low. And we weaponize that with some cards we'll talk about later to basically force our opponent to pick up and destroy like their most powerful cards with Dark Broly, since we clear everything else off. Just a great green staple. We only, moving on for our other green staple, we actually only play 2 copies of Dormant in our main board. Dormant's a great green card, and you might experiment with bumming this to 3, but it does reduce our hand, and we have an alternate floodgate option besides Dormant. Dormant's really just there if we don't have our primary floodgate up and running. However, in really aggressive matches, sometimes we want more. So if you decide to build this deck, especially with the way that it looks like events are doing best of 1 but pre-sides, you should probably sideboard at least 1, if not 2 more copies of Dormant, just so you have it available in the really aggressive matchups. But in the slower games, 2 is all you'll ever need, because you realistically only resolve this effect like once a match. Into some tech, we play 3 copies of Dispo. Hasty Dispatch Dispo is a way for us to cheat a skills onto board without paying any energy. So sometimes we won't get like a good start on turn 1, but we'll have a skills and a Dispo. So what you can do on turn 1 is you can use a skills and a Dispo to get to 15 and get out of an attack. Along with, you have a couple ways to spend the 1 energy. And then next turn you can warp Dispo and play out a Skillus, and then bounce the Skillus using Saiyaman 2. And that gets you a 15k and a 20k, and then you'll have an energy left open for a Videl with all her strength to interact with afterwards. And you'll get the Skillus back to your hand on top of that. So Dispo is just an excellent enabler for us when we're kind of like floundering and can't get it together, or if our opponent is doing a good job of keeping our board clear and wiping our threats out. This is a good way for us to get started again. It just sucks that once we get a Zamasu on board, he gets turned off. But the games where you stick a Zamasu or 2, you're usually winning anyways, so it's not a big deal. Our other drop area synergy, we play 2 copies of... Let's get her back. We play 2 copies of Ribrianne, Punishing Passion. Ribrianne is a green staple. You can pay 2 energy and discard 2 cards from your opponent's hand by warping her from your drop area to warp. Sometimes our games go long. This is a green hand control deck, but the way we control your opponent's hand is by attacking them relentlessly. But sometimes that's not enough and the game goes long, and Rib is a way for us to use some of our energy later on to just continue to attack and pressure their hand. Again, this might be a card you might want to sideboard like 1 more of for matches that go a little longer. On to some new tech. We play 3 copies of Might's Calling. Not Super Saiyan Blue, Kaioken Son Goku Might's Calling. Big old name. So this card comes out for 1 energy after one of your battle cards attacks an opponent's battle card and KOs it. So what's neat about this deck is, like I said before, where we can easily get up to like 15 and 20k base attacks. If your opponent has like a random weenie or a blocker, if you attack with the battle card and they block, you know, you're at 15 to their 5, you can combo a Skillus and go up to 20, and then combo this to 25. And if they're with like a 4 or 5k blocker, they have to put a ton of cards into the attack to get out of it. And if they don't, you can pay just 1 energy and play this card. And this dude, when he comes down, he's a 20k double strike, and when he attacks, either he KOs something or makes your opponent discard a card. So he's just great value for us. Zamasu makes him easy to trigger, since Zamasu has a high static body. Saiyaman 2 basically gets you 2 tries with the 15k and the 20k body. He's just very easy to play in this deck. And the payoff for it's great. Just don't expect him to survive because he has no defensive keywords. The other new card that we're playing, we play 3 copies of Assassin's Strike. Assassin's Strike, if you stick this card for like a turn or 2, will completely demolish an opponent's board. because not only is he 20k dual attacker, which makes your opponent have to expend a lot of resources to resist his attacks, but while he's in rest mode, your opponent has to discard 2 cards if they want to attack at all for the turn. As soon as they attack, they either pitch 2, or their attack is negated and they can't attack for the turn, which is a really, really punishing effect that will add up over time. And our free combo power in his barrier body means he's tough for them to remove. The only catch is to play him, he has the same condition as Kaioken, where you have to attack with a battle card and run over an opponent's battle card. But with all of the blocker negates running around, that's a relatively easy thing to trigger. We can actually have some relatively beefy cards in our deck, so we can make stat-threatening attacks. So it's not the end of the world to have to play him in that manner. If the game goes long enough, you can always hardcast him for 4, but it's not always the best. Moving on to our extra cards. We play 3 copies of Cell's Earth-Destroying Kamehameha. Kamehameha is really good in this deck, and I almost want to find a way to go up to 4, but space is tight in this deck. Everyone knows what Kamehameha does. It's a green staple, but in general, the combo power is kind of excessive. It's a plus 15k boost, which is just a lot. But in this deck in particular, because our leader is so tiny, sometimes against like medium-sized swings, you know, like a classic easy example would be like SS3 thwarting, you can Kamehameha and that puts you at 25, and then you just put like 5 on it. And the Kamehameha takes a card out of your opponent's hand too, so you break even. And again, this has some hand destruction elements, so you're often like running your opponent's like hand low, so the discard is not negligible. Anyways, yeah, the combo power is really useful here just because of her body size. I almost want to find a way to make room for this, but the space is so incredibly tight. Next, we play a full playset of Homicidal Clones. Clones is kind of insane in this deck. Again, for one, we benefit from being able to just walk ourselves from 5 life to 1 life. There's a reason people are on this card en masse. But there's a neat interaction in this deck where the token that Homicidal Clones, and actually all of these negates, you know, Freezer reinforcements, Chilled reinforcements, testing the opposition, all of the tokens that these negates make are skillless, except for the turn where the token is in play, because it gains the blocker keyword from, in this case, Homicidal Clones itself. But sometimes your opponent will see you play Homicidal Clones on the blocker and just opt to like not run into it and let it go. And the situations where that happens, the token becomes a skillless after the turn ends because it loses blocker and then has no skills, so it's treated as a skillless. These things have combo power, so you can, on your turn, you can use it as a plus 9k draw a card, the token that's left behind. You just can't do it the turn the token is played. It's an extra little interaction with Videl that's really good. Just be careful that you don't try to use it with like a lot of other skillless stuff, because a lot of your other cards check for you to have a green skillless, and this token it makes doesn't have a color. And last but not least, talking super combos. I play a playset of Saiyaman 2. The better super combo is obviously Paragus, but I just really like this super combo, like artwork wise, and it's on theme because the whole deck is Saiyaman 2 and Gohan and Videl. If you want to maximize your competitiveness, you can swap this out for Paragus. This is mostly like a flavor reason why we're playing it. And then for the SCR for the deck, I'm actually playing Monkey. Oops. There's a few good SCRs you could slot here. Pan, Kai, these all come to mind. In theory, Lineage. But our leader's kind of vulnerable to repeated battle card attacks. We'll talk about that more when we get to like her like what to do if you play against Videl. Sometimes your opponents will just hit you with like some beefy large threat that you need to remove, and Monkey is a way for you to do that. You almost never use the activate main. He's just here for insurance. It's a strictly like defensive utility SCR. Other options to consider would be Pan. Pan would be another really great choice here, just because sometimes all you need in this deck is time, and you tend to flood the board. So Pan buying you another turn from battle card attacks is great. And then, of course, Kai is an excellent generic SCR as well, so any of those would be good to go. And that concludes our deck profile for Videl. It's 54 cards, which is a little high, but you draw an insane amount with this leader because every time you combo a Skillless, you draw a card. Well, once per turn. Every time the leader attacks, you draw a card. You have ways to bounce and pull Skilllesses out of your deck. Like, you very frequently will go from, like, having, like, 30, or was it 40 cards over in your deck. A few turns later, you'll be down to, like, the low 20s. Like, you pull and sift through so much. The fact you're at 54 doesn't hurt you. The only things I would like to do with this is to get the count lower, so that way we could access Saiyaman 2 on 1 more often, because otherwise our only backup opener is just holding up a Kamehameha. This is our main go-to, like, you want this in your opening hand. It's something you should pretty much always mulligan for. That being said, let's talk about what to do if you sit down and your opponent is on Videl. Because she's not a very commonly played green deck, and green's not that commonly played in general, but I think she's got some legs and you might start to see her just a little bit more. First, and this seems kind of obvious, but it has to be discussed, her 5k, 10k body, when everything else in the game is 10 and 15. Videl has a lot of really tricksy ways to cheat on attacks. Like, your first attack into her, you can attack her, she'll combo a Skillless and go to 19 and get out of a 15k swing, and then she can play the Skillless, which gives her a 5k a body. Then that gives her access to, like, all her strength and charismatic villains, and there's all these, like, layers of defense. But if you push through those, like, she's just a 5-10k. Like, the first few attacks against her, this leader feels like she's made of diamond. Unless you're hitting her with, like, just giant attacks, like SS4 Gogeta thwarting or Son Goku Ultra Mastery, like just 35, 40k, like massive swings. But anything even in even in the 30k range, you know, once the leader's awakened, if you hit her for 30 and she just combos a Skillless and then hits you with a Kamehameha and plays a Skillless and she breaks even and you lost a card and you went up to 30, like this leader feels like she's made of diamond. But if you keep the pressure up, she very quickly transitions to just being made of tissue. So the biggest tip I can give you when playing against this leader is try to keep up the pressure. The longer you stay attacking her in a given turn, the more fragile she becomes. If you just, like, chip at her like an attack or two and then, like, focus on her board some, you're gonna lose that game. Like, almost certainly you're gonna lose that game. Next, and this also, of course, like, you know, some decks aren't going to be playing it, but Videl really weaponizes, where do they go? Might's Calling and Assassin Strike, and Zamasu. We're going to talk about all three of these cards. These cards all combo really nicely with Great Saiyaman 2, which I'll pull out now, a little further down. Right here. Since Saiyaman 2 gives you two bodies, both a 15k and a 20k Skillless, to enable Might's Calling or Assassin Strike, you can also break the 3 and the 2 to go directly into Zamasu, since they add up to exactly 5 energy. So this card is like the bread and butter. But she doesn't have deflect, and obviously the Skilllesses don't have deflect or barrier. And importantly, if you don't have a Skillless in play to bounce for Saiyaman 2 to get this, like, chain started, let's do that. With this Skillless, like, not in play, they can't go into Saiyaman 2 to pull up the 2-drop, and if they can't do that, they can't go into these things. So everything in the deck relies on them playing and sticking the Skilllesses. The other big thing you can do to slow this deck down is fight over the Skilllesses. It seems kind of silly, but using counterplays, God Seals, Warp Kamehamehas, any, like, random red counterplay you have, Merciless Barrage, you get the idea. Anything that stops a Skillless from successfully hitting the board can actually totally ruin this deck's tempo. Obviously, as I talked about the deck, sometimes, or at least my deck, will run Dispo, and if you pick up Videl, you should consider a few copies of Dispo as well to try to fight through that interaction. But if you don't have a Dispo, or you're not running them, and they stop you from sticking a Skillless, all these cards we talked about, you're dead in the water. Like, you can't play Saiyaman 2, you can't play all her strength, you can't go into Fuzamasu, you can't play anything. She comes completely dead in the water. So her skillesses, in addition to being threats, are also the enablers for the entire deck. They're a linchpin. So if you have some pieces of interaction, use that interaction to take down the skillesses, and you'll watch Videl crumble and fall apart. Despite those weaknesses that we just talked about, I do genuinely think Videl is a really good deck. Like, obviously we talked about things you can just do to play against it, but the skillesses are recursive. You can get multiple out on your turn and your opponent's turn once you're awakened, so that can be kind of tough to keep them off the board. The other battle cards are really stat efficient in this deck, and they're very low energy costs. And one of the best ways, ask any aggro player this, one of the best ways to get cards on an opponent's hand is to attack them relentlessly. And Videl's really good at that, actually. Like, between getting the free combo power on your turn, the skillless combo power, bouncing to go into the 2-drop, like, you make a ton of attacks with this deck. If your opponent doesn't have, like, a floodgate, you can just, like, constantly run into them and eat cards out of their hand, and then start doing hand destruction afterwards once they've, like, used a lot of their, like, excess resources. So despite the limitations we talked about, I actually think this is like a really decent deck. It's not super competitive. Some of the top tier decks are probably just gonna like run circles around you, but it's green in an environment where green feels almost unplayable. So if you want a alternate way to play through green cards that maybe you haven't considered before, or that you haven't been very satisfactory with, give Videl a look. Now that I'm back to doing content somewhat regularly, I'm going to be trying to get a match or two, and I'll be featuring this exact deck list in the gameplay. So, if you want to see this deck actually live and perform, make sure to stick around, and catch me in the next one. Take care, guys.